I lost my wife during childbirth after a terrible fight. I couldn't save her, and the guilt haunts me every single day. Trigger warning: suicide, self-harm. This all began quite some time ago, during my wife's pregnancy. At that time, life felt considerably more straightforward. I had a fulfilling job, we owned a home, and we both found joy in our lives without any worries. Each morning, we would wake up, exchange glances, and our days would brighten instantly. The period between our marriage and her pregnancy was among the most wonderful years of my life, and not just mine, but also my wife's, at least according to her perspective. We traveled extensively, explored remarkable sights across the globe, and we shared those experiences together, carefree and content. And the best part, we experienced it together. When she discovered she was pregnant, she was overjoyed, whereas I was not, for lack of a better term. I was never opposed to the concept, but I always envisioned spending my life solely with her. Perhaps later on, we could have children or even consider adoption, but I wished to relish our golden years together first. However, she was determined to keep the child, and I remained silent because, ultimately, it was her decision to make regarding her own body, and I couldn't bear the thought of hurting her. I might suggest that I was entirely against the pregnancy, but the reality was more nuanced. Upon learning about it, I grappled with mixed emotions, and over the 9 months, I gradually made an effort to embrace the situation. I did develop feelings for it, but those emotions always lingered deep in my mind, no matter how much I tried to suppress them. Then everything fell apart. Initially, I was laid off from my job, then tragically, my parents lost their lives in a car accident, and to add to that, my wife faced complications with the pregnancy, becoming bedridden during the latter stages. It was an incredibly stressful time, exacerbated by the fact that I ended up in a subpar job that drained my energy, required long hours, and provided minimal financial compensation. All of this culminated just a few days before my daughter was born. Perhaps this was specific to our situation, but my wife and I rarely argued over anything significant. We hardly ever had disagreements, but when we did clash, it escalated dramatically. Typically, it was over trivial matters that would spiral into a myriad of unrelated topics before we eventually calmed down and reached some resolution. These conflicts were uncommon, perhaps 1 or 2 occurrences each year at most. Unfortunately, on this particular night, it became one of those rare episodes. I had just finished a shift at my dreary, uninspiring job, and when I arrived home, I was in a foul mood. In my mind, I had associated the pregnancy with all the negative events that had unfolded, a thought I later recognized was completely misguided. My wife was also upset, bearing the physical burden of carrying a child and dealing with her own dysfunctional family dynamics. As expected, tensions flared, and amidst our heated exchange, I revealed my true feelings about the pregnancy. The moment those words escaped my lips, regret washed over me. Deep down, I knew it was untrue and I never intended to hurt her, but I couldn't take it back. In hindsight, that was likely the most devastating moment of my life, aside from the events that followed. After airing my feelings, my wife was devastated, and it shattered me internally. She couldn't look at me or say a word, and I desperately wanted to mend things and assure her it wasn't true, but I was acutely aware that I had made a grave mistake. I chose to leave the house to prevent exacerbating the situation and took a long drive. That night, I ended up sleeping in my truck and went straight to work the next day, overwhelmed by the guilt I felt. At that time, I was working a construction job to earn some income while applying for better positions aligned with my skill set. It was a questionable operation, but desperate times called for desperate measures. One key rule on site was the prohibition of mobile phones. If we were caught, it would lead to immediate termination. I had witnessed this firsthand, and I needed the job, so I always left my phone in my truck. Before leaving my phone behind for the day, I called her, expecting she wouldn't pick up, and indeed she didn't. I left a heartfelt message, apologizing profusely and begging for a chance to explain myself and make amends. Then I proceeded to work my shift. Upon my return, I was inundated with missed calls from my family, her family, and several unfamiliar numbers. I listened to some messages and rushed to the hospital because, as it turned out, my wife had gone into premature labor while I was at work. When I arrived at the hospital, everything fell apart. I don't know the precise details, nor do I want to know, but during the birthing process, my wife began to bleed and tragically passed away, leaving me alone with my premature daughter, who required extensive care in the neonatal intensive care unit. Initially, I was in denial, convinced this was a cruel prank my wife devised to punish me, but it hit me hard when I saw her lifeless body, utterly breaking me. I didn't cry or shout. I simply sat in silence, grappling with the reality that my beautiful wife was gone, and my last moment with her had been one of utter inadequacy. And then the consequences began to unfold. The doctors were uncertain about what had happened, suggesting that an intense moment of stress could lead to such an outcome. I immediately recognized that my actions were the direct cause of this tragedy. Not only did I know, but everyone else did as well. My wife had reached out to anyone available for emotional support during that time, so they all understood my culpability. My father-in-law confronted me at the hospital and physically assaulted me, resulting in several broken bones. My sister-in-law cleared out our home, removing any items connected to my wife. My own family severed ties with me. Many friends from both my life and hers turned away from me. Even my therapist and a support group I attended turned their backs on me when they learned the truth. In the months that followed, I was left alone to care for a newborn, grappling with the torment of what I had caused. The few people who remained in my life insisted it wasn't my fault, assuring me that while I had made a terrible mistake, I never intended for this outcome. But even now, I understand that I bear full responsibility for it. A couple of weeks later, I managed to secure a work-from-home position, which I accepted eagerly. During this period, I was also focused on caring for my daughter, which meant I was far from well-rested. Soon enough, sleep deprivation led to haunting dreams and haunting voices that nearly drove me to madness. Occasionally, the dreams depicted paradise, filled with only my wife and me in a beautiful setting doing what we adored, devoid of any worries, as if nothing tragic had ever happened. Much more frequently, however, they morphed into nightmares, where she rebuked and tormented me for every grievance I could possibly imagine. Every night, I faced either a beautiful escape from reality or a cruel and brutal nightmare. Then the voices began. I would hear her voice everywhere, day and night, throughout my home or while shopping. They would say the simplest things, and each time I heard her, I would rush to find her only to weep when hope evaporated. The combination of the dreams, lack of sleep, and the persistent voices drove me close to insanity, culminating in an attempted suicide on the anniversary of my wife's death. Ironically, it was only my brother's visit that day seeking reconciliation that prevented my demise, thus sparing my daughter from further loss. For a while, nothing improved. I consulted a psychiatrist who prescribed antipsychotic medication to stabilize my mind and sedatives to help me sleep. The voices subsided, but the dreams lingered. Even now, I still experience them, albeit less frequently than before. I never took the sedatives due to my overwhelming fear of what might happen to my daughter if I lost awareness. As previously mentioned, I redirected my focus towards my daughter, determined to pour every ounce of love and care into her life, believing that it would help me navigate my own pain. Initially, I sought help from a therapist and attended a grief support group, thinking they might alleviate my nightmares and voices, but once they learned of my past, they turned their backs on me. I realize I may seem to be shifting blame in my previous paragraph, but I assure you that is not my intention. I take full ownership of my actions, and I recognize that I deserve everything and perhaps even more of what transpired as a result. To this day, the nightmares endure, and I remain tormented by self-blame, considering suicide repeatedly due to the incredible guilt and shame I carry. The sole reason I haven't acted on those thoughts is that the most painful methods would be too swift, and my daughter is still a minor. She has blossomed into a healthy, beautiful, and kind young woman who embodies my wife in every conceivable way, and I wish to be present in her life for now. I view this as a form of twisted penance, as if enduring this constant agony while serving my daughter somehow compensates for my past actions, despite my awareness that this reasoning is entirely irrational and unfounded. She is currently a teenager, but when she matures, finds someone capable of loving and supporting her, and experiences true happiness, essentially surpassing the love I gave my wife, then I will take my own life, carrying this story with me to my grave. As it stands, she remains unaware of the truth because every person from my past life cherishes her more than they hate me and would never inflict pain on her. Until that time arrives, I will continue to love her, support her, and attend to whatever she needs from me.